Hello, I'm Craig Griffin, and this is the campaign for Real Qual, the space where qualitative practitioners come together and discuss all things qual. And today's guest is Andrew Therkelsen. Andrew is the MD of the Lab Insight and Strategy in Sydney, which is a full service agency with a specialism in qual and cultural insights. He's been a practitioner of qual for 25 years, holding director level positions at boutique and global agencies in London and Australia. In the UK, he was a long-term committee member of the Association of Qualitative Research, curating and convening courses on qual, digital methods, ethnography, semiotics, and more, and is now leading the Fundamentals of Qualitative Research course for the Research Society in Australia. Andrew, a very warm welcome. Delighted to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, mate. It's very nice to be here. Delighted as well. Thank you.
So, I've known Andrew a few years. So in fact, we used to work for the same agency together. And last month, we both presented at IIEX APAC in Bangkok. And I watched Andrew present a fantastic paper called Qual as the Business Superweapon of the Next Decade. And that's what we're going to be having a chat about today. Now, I think this comes at a time when there is anxiety about the disruption that AI is causing. I've spoken to a number of people, and some also are feeling a little bit cornered and being pushed in a certain direction. And it was really, it was really refreshing to listen to your paper, Andrew, because the heart of it was a very positive and empowering message. So I really enjoyed it. So let's get straight to the title of your presentation. Why do you think, Andrew, that the qual is going to be the business superweapon of the next decade?
Well, there's a few signals that I'm picking up on that
Mm,
are telling me that this is going to be the case. And yeah, I wanted to have an inspiring, positive message. And I do believe that everything you've just talked about is true too. We're feeling cornered, we're feeling flattened, we're feeling
mm,
like there's sort of threat around us. Um, but I can't help but think that there is huge opportunity on the other side on the other side of this moment for qualitative
mm,
research. That's what I was talking about in the conference, and and I believe it. This is not just a soundbite that I think that Qual will be the business super weapon of the next decade. It's something I wholeheartedly and sort of passionately believe in, and I think that the first signal for me that you hear everywhere is that we're drowning in data,
yeah.
but starved of meaning. We're starved
Yes.
of understanding. We're
Yeah.
starved of insight, right? It's become almost just a trope that you hear. I saw it on a marketing conference course the other day. I hear it
Mm,
from clients. I've had briefs recently that come through with this very sentence kind of stamped, inscribed into them. And I was
mm,
like, wow, that's such a visceral feeling to be
mm,
drowning in something. Like you're
mm.
literally incapacitated. You can't breathe. You're feeling sort of suffocated by all of
Like
this,
overwhelmed, almost.
just
Yeah.
totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And we all know that feeling of being overwhelmed, right? And particularly in
Mm,
data at the moment, we all feel it, not just clients and businesses. We all sort of feel like this. And it leads to paralysis. It leads to not being able to make decisions. And that's essentially
mm,
what data is supposed to be doing, like making
mm,
better data-led decisions, right?
mm,
But yet, for some reason, now we have so much data, all with the right sort of best intentions. Um, it's led to this sort of paralysis that you mentioned as well. So I was like, well, if that's the case, how do you get out of that? And to some extent, insight professional, insight is the way of doing that. It's always been the way.
mm,
We take, insights professionals within organizations take all of that disparate data and turn it into
mm,
meaning and sort of escalate up the chain. But when there's so much of it and it's so disparate and it's always on and it's just, incredibly diverse, and it's democratized often within the business as well. Everyone's got
mm,
access to different types of data and different ways of kind of explaining what they believe and what they think. It just becomes very kind of confusing. And I was like, well, qual research is the methodology. It is the it's the sort of salve to that to some extent. It's the thing that makes sense of a really complex world around us.
Mm.
And the businesses that are going to win aren't going to be the ones that have the most data. They're the ones that really genuinely understand humans the best
Yeah.
and make the best kind of decisions from that. So I feel like there's a few other circulating components of that. You talked about AI, and that is the driving force of the creation of a lot of this data. And to some extent, there's the paradox in that as well, which AI is creating more data, but also less understanding for
Yeah.
certain as well. So we have more analytics, we have more dashboards, we have more sort of automated insights, but you increasingly hear questions like, I get all that, but what does it actually mean? Like, I feel less in touch with actual people, real people, and culture than I
Mm.
did before. Why are people behaving in the way that they're behaving? What should we
Mm.
actually do about it? So that bottleneck, I think, can be unpicked a bit with really, really great qual research that essentially has always just helped make sense of things. So that was
Mm.
where got to in my kind of thought process is that qual research genuinely, when it's done really well, has that penny drop moment. And you have that moment where organizations can stitch together these disparate kind of threads of thought and go, okay, now I understand that. Now that makes
Mm.
sense. And we can then sort of move forwards and do things
Mm.
together.
Mm.
So everyone
Yeah.
kind of gets the same page. And so, yeah, it's less about having all the information. It's more about a system which qualitative research provides to move emotionally understand the temperature of your customers, reveal those truths that are sort of hidden in plain sight, feel the world, not
Yeah.
just sort of count it,
Yeah. Or
and
read
be
it.
able
Yeah.
to sort of,
Yeah.
or read it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, a transcript can tell you what someone said, but it can't always tell you why it mattered. Why did it matter
Mm.
to? Or what are the things that really matter, so that we can, really make better decisions, essentially. And I think
Mm.
that
Mm.
is where businesses are going to win or lose in the
Yeah.
next decade, and why I genuinely think,
Mm.
yeah, qual research has got the power to cut through all of that sort of
Mm.
paralysis
Mm.
and noise. And then, sorry, just on top of that, because it's something you've talked about recently a lot, I've noticed, is we're drowning in data, and simultaneously people are just getting harder to understand. Like
Yeah.
even in the last, few years that I've been doing qual research for a long time, but the complexity and the nuance of people and the positions
Yeah.
that they hold now are much more complex than they even used to be. Much more shades of grey that we have to understand. Many more contradictions that people
Yeah.
hold, which we
Yeah.
love in qual research, right?
Yeah.
Culturally fragmented societies and global brands operating in very complex cultural systems, without necessarily the nuance of being able to understand the texture of all of those different cultural systems. So really
Yeah.
context kind of specific environments that we're now operating in as humans, and rapidly changing. And that the data signals tell you a little bit about what is changing, in terms of big data, but they don't really tell you about why they're changing, how they're changing, what people feel about those changes. And so
Yeah.
the value systems that we hold, we have to get much deeper now than any time we've ever had to in the past. We can't stay
Yeah.
at that superficial level. Even with basic demographic, psychographic information, we've got to kind of get into the depth of the cultural context in which we live, the human tensions and values and contradictions that are at play,
Yeah.
in order to be able to sort of cut through and really connect with someone.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a summary of why I think it's the super weapon of the next decade.
Yeah, and I was furiously scribbling some notes here because I wanted to just add to a couple of points that you made there. So I think I've been thinking about this idea of embodied insights, and I was thinking deeply about how qual practitioners work. And when you go through a project, often, you've been through that whole process. You may have moderated, you took the brief, you've gone from the beginning to the end. And those kind of insights live with you, you embody them, and you sort of convey them. So I think this has become how I've been thinking about it, particularly when we discuss, what is the role of human intelligence, and what is our own superpower. So yes, qual is a superpower, but what's our superpower as humans within that? So I've been thinking about this idea of sort of being the embodiment of insights, the living and breathing insights, because you've been through that process, and then you're the one that ultimately delivers the conviction, to your point, to allow people to. So clients don't want more data; they need conviction, right? And I think that's our job to. It's always been our job to give them that conviction, but maybe even more so at this particular time. So that was just one thought, and I think the other thing, what's happening, and you mentioned this as well, the pace of change. Just exponentially is getting quicker and quicker, and technology is of course causing that, and that to me strikes me as a good fits within your sort of thesis around why qual is important, because things are changing so quickly, and qual is probably the best way to figure that out, and I think the things that used to predict what made people different are no longer holding true. I've had a couple of conversations with people on this recently, and I think it goes back to the SMR Congress that, it used to be fairly simple. We used to use demographics, and these were good ways to think about, to segment our studies and to look for differences. And they work because clients like them, and they were good for media buying and what have you. But I think there's a lot more dialogue now that actually these aren't as useful as they used to be. And there's a lot of many different things that predict kind of what makes us different. And this is changing quickly as well. So yeah, that just wanted to add those thoughts, because there was so much
Yeah.
about what you shared. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, really nice builds, and totally agree with all of them. I think that the embodiment idea is so powerful and
Mm.
true, and the best qual researchers actually genuinely sort of have this talent for sensing and embodying things about the world that others can't sense. And I think
Mm.
when we have a world, like you said, that is increasingly complex and changing, the ability to be able to do that is very valuable. It's
Mm.
even more valuable than it's ever been. But the changing nature of how to gather qualitative data, if you like, means
Mm.
that the process which we, let's say, we are used to be able to sort of embody that over, do some group discussions, get out in field, learn, soak it up, it sort of has accelerated now, and actually because we have AI, it is making qual more powerful than ever and
Mm.
more valuable. It's overcome a lot of the barriers that
Yeah.
some clients put to us about small samples, or the moderators kind of just sense making intuition being quite subjective,
Mm.
hard to scale those things too. So actually overcoming those barriers has been really important. But it means that we are getting signals, qualitative signals from many, many different places now. You have to embody those all. Like you have to embody them in a slightly different way to how we used
Yeah.
to embody signals. But the outcome is still the same. The input is slightly different, but the output of conviction, meaning, and essentially change for clients and making decisions is what you need to still be really good at.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the builds and the thinking there, and I feel like it adds to the argument really of how important qual is going to be
Mm.
in the future.
Yeah. So you're in your presentation, aside from putting a very convincing argument forward about the core being a superpower, you also gave a lot of suggestions and advice about how the qualitative community needs to
Mm.
adapt and prepare, well, not, prepare for the change that's already happening. So, and you talked about being fit for purpose, and there was sort of three aspects to that. And the first aspect of being fit for purpose for this new world we live in is having the right identity and mindset. Could you elaborate a bit on that, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah, so I talked about those three elements being essentially a relitigation of our professional architecture. So the
Mm,
first piece being, and they sort of stack on top of each other essentially, and it starts with identity because if you don't really believe in who you are and you don't understand the identity that you are embodying, then the other bits, the skills and the methods don't make sense. And
mm,
so, yeah, I was kind of reflecting on what is the identity of a qualitative researcher, essentially, now and
mm,
in the past, which took me to a sort of like, to be honest, just thinking about when I started in research in the year 2000, 25 years ago, and in Qual, there were different components of the process, but there was a real focus on moderation, you know,
yeah.
and there was a feeling I think back then that if you're a really good qual researcher, then you have to be a really good moderator, like first
Mm,
and foremost, essentially. So, and the ability to get qualitative data was limited. Really, it was,
mm,
essentially you have to be in the room with someone and asking
yeah.
them questions
Yeah.
and extracting that from them, right? In the
Mm,
in the most sort of sensitive and nuanced way possible. And that's still, I'm not saying that doesn't exist anymore, but over the last 25 years, the way in which we can extract information and get information and data, qualitative signals, they're kind of everywhere now. And machines are getting better and better at sort of extracting that information.
yeah.
Simultaneously, machines have got better at patterning things and the bit where we would sort of analyze that data has
Mm,
also started to become, easier to do through technology. And so the bit that remains was the sense making. And the sense making, therefore, is the part that has the most value. So it was a sort of a change in the value equation,
mm,
where we're not, I'm not saying that we don't, you need to know the skills of moderation, you need to know all the fundamentals and the basics of the qualitative craft. But the focus has to be on that final part of making sense of the data, of communicating that data, framing it up, under, understanding and communicating what matters, essentially, really
yeah.
being clear about that, using cultural and ethical judgments to help, see the wood from the trees, essentially,
Mm,
and then designing insight that creates action at the back end.
mm, mm,
So that shift from probably the capture part of the process to the sense
yeah.
making part of the process is essentially where I think our new identity lies.
Yeah.
And sense maker is part kind of shaman, part business guru,
Yeah.
who's sort of able to, take the human data, take the agent data, take the cultural data, take the social media stuff, everything that you're
Mm,
seeing is sort of channeling and interpreting, and then putting it through the wash of, well, what does this mean for the client? How does this meet their objectives, and then what are they essentially going to do about it? And
mm,
bringing them really quickly on that journey. So I suppose it really is leaning more into that strategic thinking, consultative space,
mm,
but with using qualitative signals as your conduit.
Yeah, I really like. Yeah, you mentioned shaman and guru. That's it made me smile because I think I completely get why you chose those terms, and because there is a little bit of magic to sort of how a very experienced practitioner can come up with something from all these sort of sources of data. So that was a really nice term, and I think this is where your paper maybe overlaps with, I think, the one that I presented with David Cotton, and also one or two other papers that I think we were all trying to, in our own way, answer this question, like what is uniquely human, and the main term that you used was sense making, and I think we referred to, meaning making, very similar kind of thing, and there's another paper that called it intuition. But I think broadly speaking, we were all trying to answer the same questions, like what's unique about us, and what do we need to dial up and make sure we don't lose, to protect our value and actually increase our value. So, and it felt almost like a theme, one of the themes of the conference, certainly from a qualitative perspective, anyway.
Yeah.
So, the second part of being fit for purpose was about skill set. So you said there are new skills that we need to be successful and thrive. Could you share a bit about that, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about, I think I had six in the paper, but I'll probably narrow it down to about four of the skills that we need. They're not all new skills, but they are the more important skills, I think, that we need to sort of lean on. And the first one is emotional literacy. Um, and it kind of I've not used that shaman term before, and I don't know, I'll probably get backlash for it, but it's partly that, right? To have such deep levels of emotional literacy, that the data that we're all swamped with, is is representing something emotional beneath the surface, and that emotion is what really unlocks understanding and sense making and meaning, and then action. So yeah, that is what we're sort of good at. I was looking at, I was thinking about the whole history of qual research and where we've come from, and in the course, we teach the history of qual research, and Ernst Dichter being the forefather of qualitative research, essentially. He's the American kind of psychologist who worked, I think Mad Men was pretty much based on his work, unlocking emotions really around products. And he was sort of suggested that brands and products have so much more to them than just the functional side, right? That they have symbolic meaning and they have psychic content, which is sort of where I think I kind of got persuaded a bit with this sort of link. But the emotional meaning behind what people, not just what they do, which is super important, but why they do it, how they feel, what really motivates them, what are the tensions that they experience, what are the contradictions that they're holding close to themselves, and then really understanding that in order to connect more with your audiences. So emotional literacy obviously is at the heart of a qualitative skill set, but it needs to be maintained and needs to be slightly altered in an age where as we talked about, embodied understanding, it's coming in at us in a slightly different way. So we need to be able to understand emotional context by looking at TikTok posts, by decoding 1,000 kind of big qual interviews, by like doing ethnography and getting out in the field. All those different kind of cultural signals and human signals all add into that. I think cultural intelligence is the second pillar. So not just the emotional literacy, but the cultural context in which we operate and brands operate. I think researchers are really best placed to fully understand and represent that context, all the social change, all the generational shifts, why that happened, all the cultural symbology that surrounds us all the time, the emerging behaviors that are a consequence of that changing landscape. Being really always on at a deep cultural level is, I think, what's expected of us, and what again adds power to our findings. The third is, and this is all in that kind of bucket of sense making, is narrative development, narrative storytelling and synthesis. Again, in a world where we're swamped with data and we don't have the meaning and we feel paralyzed, stories work. Stories are what make sense of all of that data, and stories are what we are so good at kind of crafting as qual research. out of quite nuanced, textured information.
Mm.
And then finally, obvious one, but AI literacy.
Yeah.
Not the sort of technical side of AI, but knowing how to embrace, essentially leaning in to AI more broadly, working really closely with the tools, scaling, overcoming some of those barriers we talked about around scale, analyzing language, becoming great prompt engineers. We're excellent at crafting questions. We should be the ones that are helping our clients ask the right questions of the data and of the AI, and working kind of in a hybrid way. With AI, which is not replacing us, but it's definitely upgrading us.
Yeah, and I think that leads us perfectly to the next the final part of being fit for purpose, which is methods. So what should we be adding to our toolkit?
Well, I think uh, I think that I feel quite passionately about some traditional methodologies, if
Yeah,
I'm
me
honest.
too. Yeah,
So I'm very much of the, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater with some of
yeah,
these methods as well.
yeah.
And when I think about sense making, I think about embodied, I think about all the things we've just talked about,
Mm.
psychology, Ernst Dichter, companies essentially coming full circle and going, oh, this always has sounded great, but I don't really get it and I haven't made sense of it and I need to.
Mm.
That emotional literacy, we're talking about projective techniques. We're talking about getting beneath the skin of someone. We're talking about observation. We're talking about ethnography. Talking about getting into people's houses. Um, I spoke to a client last week who said, I would rather speak to one mum with 4 kids in West Sydney than 1,000 synthetic mums. It was just
Yeah.
like, like there's that's the sort of the power and the richness that
Did
you
it,
that you
did they allow you to quote them for that? Because that's a wonderful quote.
I don't know. I won't say who it was, but it was,
No,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's pretty true, and it's not the first time that I hear that sort of thing. So, but
yeah,
but then the methods that we need to employ to do that are, genuinely sort of ethnographic. They are on the ground. They're out in culture. They're out
yeah,
in the weird, subsectors of society. They're at the
yeah,
edges, they're at the fringes to sort of try and start to make sense of things. But of course, we can do a lot of that remotely. We can do a lot of that digitally now. You can scrape signals, through social media. We can sort of see some of the discourse and the patterns happening in really interesting kind of corners of the internet. So being able to use a range of different mixed media, I suppose, to be
yeah,
able to sort of get closer to the action, to people and people's lives is really important. So it's yes, I'm still a big proponent of traditional qual, but all of the other things as well. Um,
mm,
we will, I feel like there's that hybrid. It feels like a truism at the moment, but hybrid ways of working with AI are the future.
yeah,
So conversational and AI moderated qual research plus human research, I feel is the way forward. And
yeah,
we can do 100 interviews, qual semi-structured or AI moderated interviews overnight, get some of that data back, scan it, use AI to show us where some of the themes are, get tight on our hypotheses and what we really
yeah,
need to answer from the brief,
yeah,
and then go and do a few interviews to bring that to life, to embody it, right, yourself.
yeah, yeah,
You can kind of do a lot of heavy lifting through some of the, through some of these amazing new technologies and conversational AI in
yeah.
particular. And then I think finally it would be, I suppose, co-creation is the kind of easy word to use, but
Mm,
in a world where things move super quickly, clients need answers, they want to be at the cold face, they need to embody what's happening as well. It is really important to bring them on the journey, and be part of
yeah,
this sense making activity.
yeah,
So learning skills that are ultra collaborative, that embed you in the business with them side by side, really bringing the consumer voice into their everyday vernacular, but not in just a sort of a data way, but in a real, like human way. Um,
mm,
you know, Sort of co-creation, big group discussions, almost like deliberative research that we used to do, where you'd have like lots of people in a room just kind of cracking the problem, listening to them, listening to their stories, bringing that to life, bringing their worlds to life through really new, interesting techniques. I
Mm,
think it is, the sort of skill that we're going to need more of in this next decade of qualitative
mm.
excellence.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. The future is definitely hybrid, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we should also embrace the new possibilities. So I think that's definitely a view I would share. Andrew, the final thing I want to ask you about, I know you're doing some you're working with a research society in Australia to specifically to prepare core researchers for this, this future. Could you share a little bit about that initiative and what how you're helping researchers to prepare?
Yeah, well, uh, firstly, I think it's something I've always been really passionate about. As someone who was a graduate trainee in qualitative
Yeah.
research,
Mm.
had the benefit of going to a fundamentals of qual course in the UK,
Yeah.
and just, it was so useful, so empowering, and it really did set me up for, to be a qual researcher. And I just want that to remain, because I really know that qual research is not dying. It's going to have its moment. It's in the midst of a time for sort of resurgence. And if we don't continue to teach the fundamental principles of qualitative research
Mm.
to the emerging generations, and ensure that they believe in it too, that they know how important, being what being a great qualitative practitioner can actually do for businesses and organizations. It's so important. But at the same time, I started looking at the fundamentals course and thinking, this actually hasn't changed much from what I did 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's essentially what we've started to do, is to really look at it and think, well, what are the things that need to go into this? We still need to ensure that the fundamentals are there. It is a fundamentals of qualitative research course, but at the
Yeah.
same time, equipping the practitioner of the future for the hybrid, it's a hybrid world that we talked about. So, having more on, not just group rooms and moderations, but going to multimodal, qualitative techniques, mobile techniques, self-ethnography, asynchronous
Mm.
methodologies, going from small samples only to big qual, and how that works, and the types of platforms that you're likely to be using, and how to continue to be brilliant while using those platforms. Um, from just asking questions to observing to co-creating to co-journaling to Miro boards and customer-led kind of story ideation, multi-sensory kind of qual as well. Again, back to the beyond projective techniques. How do we genuinely help make sense of someone's very complex life at the moment,
Mm.
and all of the different sort of associations that you can use to do that. And then at the back end, as a sense maker and a change maker in organizations, um, how do you tell better stories? How do we use AI in augmented interpretation? When do you outsource your brain, and when don't you? And
Yeah.
essentially trying to maintain the integrity of qualitative thinking, because that
Yeah.
is that's the super weapon in action.
Yeah.
It's your brain essentially, and if you
Yeah.
don't know when to keep your brain ticking over and to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and when to
Yeah.
just outsource it to generative AI, then you're going to be in the same trap of swimming in data and not knowing what it means. So it's
Yeah.
kind of trying to make sure that the qualitative research of the future is equipped with that skill and, what would I say, like, confidence, essentially, to trust themselves.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, understanding which parts of the research process and we can and should be automating to, to drive efficiency, to free up time, and which part should not, I think is one of the key challenges of our time. And that requires, a very deep look at what we do and how we work, and almost modeling how we work from beginning to end, and like what can a machine do well and what can it not do so well. So I think we all need to do that. I agree with your point on the fundamentals. I think there is a danger that client side, agency side, agencies are building platforms. There's quality scale platforms out there. A lot of research is done through platforms, and there's a danger that the training becomes on how to use the platform, and we lose the fundamentals of qual, which of course is grounded in social science, and we need to understand that social science background. That has to be the starting point before we get into how to use tech. So 100% with you there, Andrew. I think that's, sorry, is there something you want to add?
No, I think that's a really profound point, I suppose, to end on. And one of the things that we have thought about with the course, and the Research Society in general here in Australia, we are all responsible for protecting the parts of this industry that make it really, really valuable, for clients. And we have to do whatever we can to do that. But there is a danger with something like the fundamentals of qual course that it starts to feel old-fashioned, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But all of the things that we teach in that course are really important. So it's putting it in context and it's sort of contextualizing it, invigorating it, and giving it the 2025 to 2035 kind of spin, so that you know why those things are important, and you know how powerful they are, and you know not how to use them. So it's a bit of a fine line that I think we're kind of treading at the moment, because there's nothing old-fashioned about what we're doing as an industry, actually, and it's more relevant now, I think, than it's probably ever been. So how do we all just really celebrate and make sure that we're doing the best work so that it genuinely sort of thrives?
I hear you 100% on this, because I think I found this as well with doing the campaign for Real Qual. Some people interpret that as being kind of like anti-tech, and it's not. It's more pro qual craft, and you can, in defending qual craft and actually promoting it and trying to highlight its value, there's a danger you can get labeled as a laggard or something, and that's something I found as well, which is kind of not at all, because this campaign is always meant to be something that's interested in exploring the intersection of research, tech, and qual, and see where qual is going, and see what's useful and how we can adopt and improve, and but at the same time we don't lose the craft, and that's always been the conversation. But we shouldn't have to apologize for wanting to teach the fundamentals, really, should we? Because it's so important to what we do.
And I suppose, Craig, just thank you for the work that you've done on this. Genuinely, I think the whole community is really grateful that you've created this, and I hope we can continue to support you and make sure that
Thank you.
This dream of not dream, my vision of qualitative research being the superpower of the next decade comes to fruition.
Yeah, well, I hope we were able to share a glass of champagne in 10 years and celebrate, what the role of qual and what it's playing in helping our clients. That would be wonderful. So thanks very much, Andrew. I really appreciate you taking time today. It's been, again, a fantastic paper, a really important paper. I feel really enjoyed chatting with you. I feel we share a lot of the same values, in qualitative research. For anyone listening that would be interested to find out more about what Andrew is working on with the Research Society in Australia, if any of you are responsible for training, I'm sure Andrew would be delighted to help you. We'll leave Andrew's contact details in the comments or the chat, and please reach out to Andrew. So we'll say goodbye for now. This is the campaign for Real Qual, and we'll have more content real soon.
Thanks, Craig.